Labour will be looking to reform inheritance tax. The Treasury is looking at ways to raise more money from inheritance tax amid growing pressure on the country's finances ahead of the autumn budget. Officials have been tasked with examining whether tightening rules on the gifting of money and assets could be one way of addressing a gap between revenue and spending that is estimated to reach more than £40 billion. Among the moves being considered are changes to how wealth or assets can be given away prior to death to reduce inheritance tax liabilities. This includes examining the possibility of a cap on lifetime gifting. At present, gifts made 7 years before someone dies are not subject to inheritance tax, while those given 3 to 7 years before death are taxed on a sliding scale known as taper relief, with the rate reducing each year from 32% to 8%. So it's not clear that specific reforms Labour will make on inheritance tax, or what specific reforms rather, and nothing so far has suggested that the taxes will increase. But these potential reforms have once again sparked the inheritance tax debate, with some people taking to Twitter calling the taxes evil. Inheritance tax is promoted only by evil, nasty people who hate that people love their children. James Melville says, and he's the radical centrist of our time, inheritance tax is the most vindictive of all taxes, robbing the dead, punishing the bereaved, destroying a lifetime of family work, legacy, and assets. Notice he says assets there. The problem in this country is that we tax work more than we tax wealth. Inheritance tax affects a tiny amount of people in this country. Only those who are wealthy will face the tax. Yet it's not a popular policy. Ben, I want to get your response to Labour looking into inheritance tax reforms. I kind of want to hear your take on this sort of wider debate on inheritance tax and whether it's evil.
Yeah, of course it's evil. The communists are coming for your money, Curtis. Of course it's evil. No, like each child can receive 325k completely tax free, right? So this isn't like, oh, it's going to leave you in the gutter and take away all your money. Like, that's not how inheritance tax works. I know I don't need to tell people this. But I also think, what about mothers like Alicia, who started going to a food bank in August 2023 to collect food for her children while she herself is starving? She told The Guardian last year it leaves her feeling worthless as a mother. Does she not love her children, Jamie? Like, why should we be punishing her? Why is there this double standard? Because if the rich don't pay tax, which they inherit, mothers like Alicia inevitably end up suffering. And again, we're talking about tax on assets worth over £325,000. Okay, so I don't know many places in the country where you can't buy a reasonable property for £325,000. Like, it's not going to get you the best properties, sure, but it's going to make sure that you are stable, and that's what your inheritance should do, right? We also know from leaked memos that Angela Rayner has suggested 8 wealth taxes. And I think this is all coming to an inevitable conclusion, right? Basically, the conclusion is that we can't afford the greed of the rich in this country. Or rather, we can't afford the greed of the rich to go completely untouched. So, my suggestion would be, if we dislike inheritance tax so much, okay, but let's set up the incentives for avoiding it so that they benefit our society more widely. So, for example, you could have exemption for property given to children with no other homes or houses, or passed on to family members with no other homes or houses, thus incentivizing people to give their their properties in particular to the even distant family members who don't have homes or houses, or even friends, of course, they can leave it to, that don't have homes or houses. You could also put an exemption in place for the taxation if you sell it to the state to be used as council housing to diversify council housing stock. So, you instead of being taxed for going over the 325k limit, if you sell that to the state, you get the 400k or whatever it is, and then to give to your children, or if you're dead, your children take that, and then the government takes that house, they can then, they buy that house off you, and then that house can be used as council housing stock.
I want to ask you something though, Ben. Um, it's not a popular policy, right? It's not a popular when it comes to economic issues. The left is usually quite in touch. Actually, people want to see increasing. Excuse me. People want to see higher taxes on the wealthy. People want to see a wealth tax, but it doesn't translate the same when it comes to inheritance tax, even though it's kind of a wealth tax in a way. But people don't want to support that, and I guess the logic here is when you describe taxing the rich and wealth taxes, it's only going to go to sort of the top 1%. But when it comes to inheritance tax, people think it's unfair because your parents worked hard, they bought a house, and now they're passing it on to their kids, and they feel like the state is stealing off them. Now, it doesn't mean I don't support inheritance tax. I do, but it's a much harder sell to people because people feel like it's kind of like theft from the government. So it's a much harder sell than it is to the public than it is like a wealth tax, for example.
Yes, but this is. I think that one of the things is that any kind of tax can be described as theft if you believe that the tax is unjust. Whether or not you describe a tax as theft is almost entirely down to whether or not you think that it is a just use of it's being justly used and justly taken from you. Um, I would also say that you could quite easily raise the threshold to 500,000, and I honestly think that might better reflect the economic environment we're living in, particularly with property prices. I think that might be a fair thing to do. Um, but I also think that one of the ways you can tackle this, as I was saying before, is you make the exemptions incentivize people in progressive directions. You actually set up the exemptions so that when people get tax exemptions, they're doing it in progressive directions, investing in local governments, investing in local businesses, investing in council housing. You make it so that the policy moves in a progressive direction. The policy itself from the Labour government closing the tax loopholes is fine, but they could just be more active about it. It feels very knee jerk.
I do wonder though whether the decimation of the public realm has made people feel. I mean, look. We talk about individualism from Thatcher, right? It has made people more selfish in the sense that we care more about just our family and our immediate relatives, friends, and family than sort of the wider society. In part, is because the public realm has been decimated. Do you think that lends credence to being against an inheritance tax because people feel like that the state isn't working for them, public services aren't working for them? We're paying our taxes and it's going on, let's be honest, private contracts. It's going on war. It's going on tax cuts for billionaires, but it's not fixing our potholes. It's not fixing our NHS. Therefore, people feel like, well, we have to sort of make our own way. The state isn't going to be there for us. And then anything we accrue over our lives in terms of assets, when it gets taken back off the state, I feel like personally, had people believed in the public realm or had a stronger belief in the public realm, people might be more open to things such as inheritance tax. But because that's been stripped away, it feels like, well, this is all we've got now, and now the state's coming for our stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the entire Conservative project since 1979 has basically been to underfund public services and then say, look, public services don't work, let's make them private. Right, that's step one. And step two is to reform our tax systems so that tax is as punitive as possible, so that people associate taxation with bad things, right? Your council tax bill, the council taxes were reformed in the 1980s in order to make them more punitive. This sort of like modern way of doing council taxes is designed in a very kind of American way to be as punitive as possible. It's like, this massive bill is coming out of your paycheck every month, and going on bin services which are getting less and less frequent, or roads which are like kept more and more badly, in order to be able to like make it so that when you think tax, you think bad. I think that's, it's not an unconscious policy decision. It's something that's been very deliberate in neoliberal thinking, and has gone all the way through from Thatcher through each of her acolytes that we've had to deal with for the past 30 years. And I think it's fair to say that all of them have been acolytes of Thatcher.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.